Movies love to show medieval executions as constant, brutal spectacles, a world where people were dragged daily to the scaffold, punished in front of cheering crowds. The truth was far more complex. Executions weren't everyday affairs. They were carefully staged events meant to terrify, control, and reinforce authority. Behind the drama was a calculated system of power. Here's what medieval execution was actually like, not the movie version. Contrary to modern imagination, medieval towns weren't constantly watching beheadings or hangings. Executions were rare compared to the number of crimes committed. Most wrongdoers faced fines, public shaming, or mutilations like branding or ear cropping. Full executions were reserved for serious crimes such as murder, treason, or repeated theft. That rarity made them more shocking. When an execution was ordered, it became a major civic event. Authorities wanted maximum visibility. People travelled from villages to witness the punishment, creating a festival-like atmosphere. These weren't casual gatherings, but orchestrated demonstrations of state power. The sight of a criminal dying was meant to deter others and remind communities who held authority. Executioners themselves were public figures. Their job carried both fear and stigma. Skilled executioners were expected to make death swift, particularly when beheading nobles, but failures, botched strikes, or prolonged hangings turned into public scandals. The timing and staging mattered too. Executions often coincided with market days or religious festivals to ensure large audiences. The symbolism was deliberate. Punishment tied to community and morality. The church often played a role, with priests urging repentance before the fatal moment. Executions were shocking not because they were constant, but because they were rare and unforgettable. Each one was a carefully crafted message of dominance, reminding ordinary people what awaited anyone who defied law or ruler. Yet the method of death itself revealed even more about medieval society's obsession with order. Execution was never one-size-fits-all. The method often reflected class, crime, and gender. Nobles, for example, were usually given the dignity of beheading, considered a swift and honorable death. A sharp sword or axe ended life quickly, provided the executioner was skilled. Peasants rarely received such treatment. Hanging was the standard punishment for common criminals, slow and humiliating in its spectacle. Women sometimes faced different fates. Burning was often reserved for crimes like heresy or witchcraft, chosen not only for severity but also for symbolism. Fire was seen as purification, destroying both body and sin. Drowning could also be used for women, seen as more modest because it avoided public exposure of the body during death. Punishment wasn't just about eliminating a criminal, it was about reinforcing hierarchy. The wealthy and powerful were executed in ways that preserved some sense of status, while the poor died in more degrading and painful ways. Even among the condemned, social order was maintained. The type of crime mattered as well. Treason demanded dramatic punishments. In England, drawing and quartering became infamous. Thieves might hang, but rebels were disemboweled and dismembered to emphasize betrayal against crown or state. These brutal spectacles weren't only about killing, they were political theatre. Execution was never random cruelty. It was a structured system where class dictated method, crime dictated severity, and symbolism mattered as much as justice. To watch someone die wasn't simply to see punishment, it was to be reminded of your own place in the social ladder. And beyond method, there was the question of what happened before death, the world of torture and confessions. Torture and execution often overlapped in the medieval world. While movies loved to exaggerate sadistic devices, torture wasn't always constant or casual. It had a specific purpose: extracting confessions, punishing rebels, or turning the condemned into a public lesson. Pain was secondary to the statement it made. Common methods included the rack, where joints were slowly pulled apart, or the strapado, which suspended victims by their arms tied behind their backs. Iron boots crushed legs, thumbscrews destroyed hands, and whipping left scars meant to mark criminals permanently. Yet torture wasn't always fatal. Many victims survived, though often maimed, their broken bodies serving as warnings long after release. The legal system relied heavily on confessions. Torture was a tool to achieve them, especially in cases of heresy or treason where proving guilt was otherwise difficult. For authorities, it wasn't just cruelty, it was a means to justify executions by making guilt undeniable. Public torture amplified its impact. Punishments might be carried out in town squares, turning pain into spectacle. Even when hidden in prisons, tales of torture circulated widely, building fear. This fear was essential to control populations. Not all regions used torture equally. England, for instance, was relatively restrained compared to continental Europe, where inquisitions normalized elaborate devices. Still, the shadow of torture hung over medieval justice everywhere. Torture wasn't random violence, it was calculated. Each scream, each scar carried meaning beyond the individual. It reinforced the idea that resisting authority wasn't just illegal, it was unbearable. And when the execution itself arrived, it often became the final act of a process designed to break body and spirit long before death. Executions weren't private punishments hidden behind prison walls. They were community theatre, staged for maximum impact. Marketplaces, crossroads, and castle gates became the stage. People didn't just stumble upon executions, they were summoned, urged to witness justice unfold. Crowds brought a festival-like atmosphere. Merchants sold food, children were brought by parents as moral lessons, and preachers gave sermons about sin and repentance. The condemned might confess or be forced to make a statement, turning their death into both punishment and performance. The crowd wasn't passive either. They jeered, prayed, or sometimes pitied the condemned, shaping the mood of the event. The executioner's performance mattered enormously. A skilled, clean strike could earn respect. A clumsy blow could incite riots or sympathy for the victim. Executioners sometimes repeated strikes, prolonging agony. In hangings, ropes broke or death dragged on for minutes. Far from dignified, these events reminded everyone of the brutal realities behind authority's polished image. Executions also reinforced religious order. Church officials framed them as spiritual cleansing. Watching someone die wasn't just about justice, it was about morality. Proof that divine law worked through human rulers. Repentance before death was expected, with priests urging sinners to accept punishment as salvation for their souls. For rulers, executions unified communities under fear and obedience. They weren't merely punishments, they were rituals of power, binding crowds together in shared experience of control. Yet the execution rarely ended when the victim's body fell. What happened afterward could be even more chilling. In medieval justice, execution didn't finish at death. The body itself became part of the punishment, a lasting warning for all who passed by. Heads were displayed on city gates, bridges, or castle walls. Limbs were scattered across different towns, ensuring the message spread far beyond one community. A single traitor's body could intimidate an entire region. Gibbets, iron cages hung in public, displayed corpses until they rotted. Birds picked at flesh, skeletons dangled in the wind, and travelers were forced to confront the sight. These grisly displays weren't random cruelty. They were deliberate, designed to extend punishment beyond life, turning bodies into permanent tools of authority. Even in burial, justice intruded. Criminals were often denied consecrated ground. Bodies might be buried at crossroads, pinned with stakes to prevent restless spirits, or simply discarded. The treatment reflected not just crime, but the fear that social order must remain intact even after death. This extended punishment wasn't just about deterrence, it was about memory. Communities couldn't forget executions when reminders hung over gates or lay in shallow graves outside town. Power was made physical, carved into landscapes and daily routines. Executions were more than violent ends. They were ongoing, symbolic acts that reshaped how people saw crime, authority, and even death itself. The condemned didn't just die, they were transformed into messages. And those messages haunted medieval society long after the sword struck or the rope tightened. Medieval executions weren't constant spectacles of gore, but when they happened, they were unforgettable. Methods varied by class, torture blurred justice and cruelty, and public rituals turned death into theatre. Even after life ended, bodies carried the message of power. The truth is, executions weren't just punishments, they were tools of control that shaped entire societies. If you want more unfiltered history like this, stay with us for the next story Hollywood never dares to tell.